Excellent. Perfect. Read my mind. I will wear my president hat for just a moment before I get started with this presentation, as some of you may not be as familiar with AMPS as the rest of us. So AMPS is the Australian Music and Psychology Society. The idea to form this group was back at an earlier international conference in 1996, and it was incorporated as a society in 2002. Starting in 2013, we've had biannual conferences, and this year in 2022, the plan is to have another virtual conference given the ongoing pandemic issues. So AMPS is our national body of researchers in music science, music research broadly. That includes music psychology, but also sociology, therapy, education, and the list goes on and on. We are, in terms of our international affiliations, associated with the other countries in the Asia Pacific Society for the Cognitive Sciences of Music, which is ASCOM, and then the larger international body hosts a conference referred to as the International Conference on Music Perception and Cognition. We ushered in a new committee in July, and I'm really excited for all of the people we have, a lot of who are in the room with us today. So we've got a great committee, and we're looking to do a lot of things this year, and this series is just one of the first initiatives that we're putting in place now that we have Melissa in that ECR development chair. I do want to also just highlight really quickly the AMPS forum. If you are familiar with AMPS, we've had a newsletter in the past, but we now have a more dynamic interactive forum. And this is where you were able to register for things like today, but also there are a number of different posts there around news and engagement opportunities. So do check in if you're interested. It's also a place where you can become a member if you're not already a member of the society, which of course is free. So it's a great thing, and we hope to see you whether or not you attend the series or pop in and out for just a few of them. We hope that you engage with us as much as you like. With that, I will switch and put my other hat on. So I'm really excited today to talk about online scholarly identity. And I will just pause for another moment to say that my research expertise, as Melissa introduced me, falls under the way that music engagement is changing in the digital climate. I think a lot about our everyday music listening activities and how these affect our health and well-being. But that's not what we're here to discuss today. Today, we're here to discuss what a scholarly identity is and how and why we might be working on this to actively engage with our identity and put that out there online. So here's a quote about what scholarly identity is. It says, put simply, this is the product of your training, your expertise, all of your interests, publications, research agenda, everything that may be important to you. And so this is multifaceted. If you are someone who is a practitioner and a researcher, maybe a clinician and a teacher, you don't have just one identity. It does have a lot of different things. But the idea is that this is your identity that you want to portray to others so that they can find you. And that really is underpinning why you want to bolster your scholarly identity. It is because basically you want to be the person that other people think of when there's an opportunity that would make sense for you. So you want to grow your trajectory. Whether you're an early, mid-established career person, you are on a trajectory, you're on a research agenda, and you're trying to make progress. And this is the way to help sort of convey to other people what it is you do, what it is you want to do, what you're trying to do. In a sense, what we're doing here is carving out your space and your area so that you become known for what you want to be known for. So let's really dive into how we do this. And the way we do this to start out is to start by asking yourself, what are you all about? You can even make a list to figure out what this is going on. And I might give you that as a little homework assignment to do. Of course, your identity lives in a few different places. It is in person, it is on paper. And for today, what we're going to focus on, given our ever-present digital interactions, is our online identity. So I do want to start out by saying this is something that you do have to cultivate. You do have to actively create what it is that you want to portray as your online identity. So an easy way to check this is to simply Google yourself and check what comes up when you put your name in, and maybe your name alongside your organization, affiliation, or university. And to see, and there's two screenshots there that I took a while back now, but with two different, so I'm currently at James Cook and used to be at the University of Melbourne. And you can see how the affiliation actually changes what comes up in the top search hits for Google for me. So because at Melbourne, I was engaged in the ARC Center of Excellence for the History of Emotions. And when I started at James Cook, there was very little research knowledge about me at the university, but there was a lot of teaching related information. You can see how these lists are quite different. And what I just want to highlight here is basically that you want to think about, especially if what comes up as the top hits are not what you want to come up, then it really gives you a sense of what work you might have in store for you to cultivate this online identity. When we talk about online identity, I think about two different categories of things to do, essential things and then optional things. So let's start with the essentials first. And there are two essentials that I think everybody here needs to do if they haven't already done that. The first one I want to talk about is ORCID, having an ID that is attached to your name. This is really important because when you submit things for publication or submit grant funding applications, often you'll be asked to submit your ORCID ID. And the idea behind your ORCID ID is to have a number that is attached to you that is individual. So even if you have a name that is very common, it will be able to point specifically to your background, to your expertise, and to your research publications. What I've learned very recently is a tip that I want to share today, in that what I had was just my name, but you can see in the first circle there on the screen, the also known as section. And this is something that you can edit in your ORCID ID profile. And what's really interesting here is it really changes what ORCID finds and associates with you. And so basically what you want to do is come up and pull this up, edit this so that it has all possible versions of your publishing name. Some journals just put first initials, maybe it's your first name and a middle initial. Perhaps you've even changed your last name for a variety of reasons. You can enter all of these possible versions, and it really does impact what is associated with your profile. The other nice thing that is completely under your control and can be edited is the keywords. So that's the second circle that's highlighted on that profile. And what you want to do here is add as many as possible to describe the type of research that you do. And this is a near infinite list of what you can put in there. And the reason you want to do this is so that those keywords become associated with you and who you are and what you do with your research. So I recommend, even if you're sitting here thinking, I already have an ORCID profile, definitely worthwhile to pull that up and maybe populate or update what are in those two specific sections. The second online essential is to set up a Google Scholar account. So this is set to your institutional affiliation, which can be changed if you move. But this is really nice. And I like that it is basically, after you set it up, minimal upkeep. Once it's set, Google automatically updates it. And you can even set up things like alerts for things and changes. And what's really nice about Google Scholar is there's research that shows that the use of Google Scholar is really how people are searching for not only publications, but also metrics to judge things like citations and H-index and all of those other metrics. So the nice thing is once you have this set up, you are able to also make use of those metrics that come along with it. The nice thing about Google is that it's quite broad in what it searches for. So it includes not only just the publications that maybe some of the other more traditional library databases will show for you, but it also pulls conference presentations and other things, blog posts, whatever you might put on the web. So it's a bit of a wider catchment than some of the other websites and databases. Those are the two essential things that I think everybody needs to do. And I should also mention that a lot of universities require you to do, if not both of those, at least the ORCID element. The other things I think I would suggest that you consider are to build your own website. And this can be something that's very simple and range from simple to complex, depending on how much time and effort you want to be putting into this. Because it can be quite a bit to upkeep depending on how you set up your website. You can use a free tool to do this. And also, if you don't want to create a separate website, I will be talking about social networking platforms, which can serve this function as well. The really nice thing I think about actually setting up your own website is that it can be independent from a university affiliation, which means that you actually have the flexibility to edit and change what's there with a lot more ease than you do with a university affiliation. And also, if you change university affiliations, you still have this consistent presence with your website, regardless of moving from a student status to a postdoc or changing jobs, moving countries. The website still works. So if we think about a website, we need to think about what we might put on the website. And my recommendation is to consider what you might want to put out there as available information. This could be something like a biography, your contact details. Some people put a CV or resume that is readily available. If you're actively conducting research and recruiting participants, then you can put your participation opportunities and use this website both as a way of showcasing who you are, but also as a platform for recruitment and interacting and disseminating findings. And I think that's the other really important piece here, is that you want to think about accessible output, not only for academic colleagues, but also members of the general public. So I think here you have wide open opportunities to consider what you might put on your website, be it media clips, be it blog posts where you distill some of that academic jargon into summaries that are public facing, conference presentations, especially if now we're doing so many recorded presentations, you already have that YouTube link that you can embed for people to watch. If you're looking for tips, here are a few of our music researcher colleagues' websites that I like for various reasons. And as I'm going through, I realized, Melissa, what I'll do is create a PowerPoint slide deck of this that we can share with participants so that these hyperlinks can actually be used and revisited. So that will come to everyone after the session. I really like a few of these websites. These aren't, of course, the only websites, but Dave Baker, who will be presenting in this series later, as we mentioned earlier, I really like his blog and the way that he does blog posts. Amy Belfi has really great media on her website. Finn Upham, they have a great podcast. So they've figured out a way to engage with the general public through a podcast. And Victoria has this amazing list of resources on her website. So I've just highlighted these because I think they do very different things and have very different strengths to consider. Barreling on, I did mention when you think about setting up your own website, you could use a social networking platform that does a very similar function. When you think about this, one of your things that you do need to consider, and I can't say this for all of you, is you do need to consider the ethics of some of these platforms. So some of these platforms like ResearchGate and academia.edu, they vary in the way that they use your data and share that data. So they do connect to Google Scholar, which is really nice and all of that, but you do want to make sure that you are in agreement to signing up and using those platforms. People ask me about using one versus another. I've actually chosen to use both, which does seem like doubling efforts when posting and providing opportunities to get the information about me. I myself chose to do that for a very specific reason, in that I really want my work to be accessible and to be accessible outside of a university that provides you access to published academic work. Different disciplines, when we think about music psychology, we sit in between the social sciences and medical sciences and all of that, where some disciplines tend to congregate in one versus the other of these platforms. So that's another reason you might choose one or the other. LinkedIn is another one that's a possibility. Again, Dave Baker has a really nice blog post about how to use LinkedIn as a tool. And so I'll point people to that because he speaks about it far better than I do. And we come to my favorite, which is Twitter. So I'm a big proponent of Twitter. I tweet a lot, and I've found that it really is a great way to engage with our community. I know we're not focused just on music psychology, but if you are a music psychology person or music researcher here today, our hashtag for our community is music science. You have to know your community and connect with your community, and whatever the hashtag is for your discipline, for your research area, really get involved. So if you are a music researcher, Rebecca Gelding, another person who's going to be speaking in this series, has a great list of music researchers if you want to start getting connected to some people. But I want to try to tell you why you might want to consider doing Twitter and being engaged on Twitter. So Dr. Mike has 10 top tips or 10 sort of reasons why you might engage in the Twitter platform. And it is self-promotion. It is about bolstering your scholarly identity and being known for what you're doing and what you're trying to do. But it's more than that as well, because you're sharing and supporting your colleagues and engaging in public-facing dialogue. I've met a lot of people through Twitter. I've, had enjoyable conversations, and it's actually led to a lot of opportunities for me. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But you do want to think about, it's not as simple as just simply signing up and then having an account and not doing anything. If it is something that you're going to want to engage in, and this is true of any of the social media platforms. So if you have a more visual research area, perhaps Instagram is a better tool than Twitter. Or perhaps there's a lot of science communication that happens on TikTok now. So it really is choosing the social networking tool, the social media medium that you think is appropriate and one you want to engage in. For me, that's Twitter. And for a lot of people, I think that is Twitter. So my tips are that you actively participate. You can schedule tweets, but you can also engage as you go. In fact, Melissa and Crystal and I were just tweeting as this session started. So hopefully we've got some retweets going. And on that note, we've got a hashtag for this seminar series. AMPS itself has a Twitter account, and Diana is in charge of our social media. So our hashtag now that we're talking about it for this series is AMPlify 2022, in case you are on Twitter. And we do encourage you, reach out, get in touch, make contacts, and become a part of our community. So it's really great that we use this tool to self-promote, but being a good online citizen is not just self-promotion. You really do want to engage in dialogue, share and retweet what other people are doing, and be a part of that conversation. In the past, people have questioned sort of having a very separate professional versus personal identity and whether or not you can only be professional. I find that hard distinction is more of a blurred boundary, and it's more about what you're comfortable with. So I think actually for Twitter that it's quite nice when people mix in some personal elements to the professional. And we all know how much we love seeing animal photos in Zoom and on Twitter. So I think GIFs, pictures, animals, these are easy ways to be showing that you are actively engaging in what's going on. There are tangible Twitter outcomes. There is research, published research that shows there are positive correlations between tweeting about your publication and the citations that result from your publication. So in a sense, this is not only to be a part of a community, but there are tangible benefits for your research career if you are choosing to get engaged. So as I mentioned before, I just thought I would say as a result of being active on Twitter, I've gained immense amounts of networking and been put in contact with people and built my community. I've had opportunities to be involved in mentoring schemes. I've definitely have research collaborations that have resulted simply because of connecting on Twitter. There have been people who have gotten in touch with me because they've found me through Twitter for media interviews and then consequently coverage of my research. And I've also had the opportunity to do speaking and conference invitations that I would not have known about or been invited to if I was not involved. So these are really powerful ways of growing your identity and growing your network through participating in Twitter. I do want to highlight a few things that we don't have time to cover today, but I'm happy to talk about any of these things actually with you after the session. But these are some more platforms and things to consider with your online engagement. And that's platforms that assist with open access publishing and open science practices data sharing. There's also Publons for getting recognition for the reviews that you're doing. And other social media minded websites that aim to assist you in promoting your research through audiovisual ways as well. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the different platforms, the possibilities, what I think are essential and what I think are recommended. But I want to now also talk about branding considerations and considerations around being visible and searchable and findable. And so with this in mind, I've got a number of tips that I would like to share. One is that I think it's really nice when people use the same language across these different sites. You want to use a recent headshot. You don't want a photo that's years and years old and isn't representative. The same about sort of a bio. You want to use those targeted keywords. People are going to be doing Google searches. You want you to come up. So you need to think about the keywords to do that. And with all of this, you need to be true to yourself. You have that personal, professional, and sort of how much information about you personally that you want to share. But regardless of where you personally draw that line, you want to be authentically true to who you are. You're not trying to overinflate or create something that is false. This is still who you are and still true to what you're doing. Another really big thing is around accessibility. So when we're talking about hashtags, screen readers, if you've got a word that more than one word in a hashtag, if you capitalize the first letter of the words, a screen reader, instead of reading it as just a mashed bit of letters, will actually read it as words. So if we take music science, for example, you should always capitalize the M and the S so that it gets read out as music science. There's also image description. So alternative text for photos and GIFs are really good for people who aren't able to see that. And again, it will read that out as a screen reader for people. And the biggest thing that I have to say is you really don't want to just jump into this. You do want to think about it. You want to plan and think about how and why and when you're going to use these different platforms. I can tell you now that my use of Twitter is radically different than when I first started out, but I think I now have an understanding of who I am and what I'm trying to do on Twitter. The other thing, like social media, it can suck up a lot of time. So the when question is also really interesting. You don't want this to become something that rules your life or overtakes and overshadows work that you're doing. So you can put boundaries around it. When I lived in Melbourne and I was using public transport, I sort of held that as my time to be on Twitter as a nice way of bounding what I was doing. And I think we all don't want to fall into that scrolling forever pattern. So you do want to think about how and why and when you use it and what the purpose is behind it. A few more branding considerations to think about: your publishing name, to think about if you have additional identities to showcase. If you've got, let's say, a website that has a page about you as a researcher, you as a practitioner or a teacher or a clinician, you can have all of that interconnected, but you have to think about how they relate and how they interface with each other and what you want to portray. With all of this, you want to think about not using jargon. And something that I think about that's really important, because I've fell prey to it before, having changed universities for both while I was a student and for jobs, is registering for these platforms with an affiliation, an email address that it may not be permanent. Because if you change affiliation, you still want to be able to access these things. So my tip to everybody is that you create a secondary permanent email address that you use as a secondary email alongside whatever your current institution or organization address is. And that's true for when my recommendation is true in the sense of these social media platforms, but also when you submit journal manuscripts, funding applications, all of these websites that we have to use. If you've got that constant backup, you can make sure that you maintain your ability to use it even when you change institutions. Melissa, how much time do we have?
It's 4:31.
Okay, I'm gonna go really quickly, just a few more slides, and then we'll open for discussion. So the whole reason I'm talking about scholarly identity interfaces with science communication skills. So these are really critical in our ability to communicate our findings. So there are a number of different science communication, or SciComm is the hashtag there, that you can get involved in to help you develop these things. And I'll leave it to you to investigate these or ask me about any of them and my experiences with them. I will say there are also media lists, and you may be sitting there thinking, I'm not an expert, but I can tell you, you are eligible, you are qualified. Please put your name to these lists, like the ABC's list of experts, so that you do get contacted by media to contribute. If they get in touch with you and it is something you can't speak to, that's great, but you want them to at least try. Science communication assists with your public speaking, and that's true for all of these variety of different audiences. So you need to be able to speak to kids, to youth, to academics, to non-academics. And I think that a lot of that goes with how you talk and do storytelling and use of visuals. So I'm rushing through these slides so that we can do our discussion, but like I said, I'll be sharing the slide deck and you can take it in your own time. There's a great series by Wired about leveling, where there are experts in different fields that have to talk about their research at 5 different levels, from kid to a colleague, an expert colleague. And it really just shows you the way that it's not dumbing down, it's not simplifying, it's just thinking about the way that you present this information. And I think that's extremely important when we think about communicating our findings to the general public. And all of this links to building impact. As researchers, we have to show the impact of our research. As an ECR, you need to be able to prove that you're having impact beyond academia. And the way that we do this is through things like social media and public engagement in science communication and talks and things. We do that. So there are a few questions to think about: why and who you want to communicate with. And that's really why we recommend social media, not just myself, but a lot of people, because that's where people are. People are on Facebook, they're on Twitter. If you want to reach the people, you need to go where they are. And so all of what I've been talking about today hits the mark when you look at things that tell you what you should be doing in terms of building your impact. and that is to have a Google Scholar, to write blog posts, to do these share e-prints and all of these things. And so I hope today I've given you an overview of some of the different platforms that you might be able to use to your advantage to communicate who you are, and also raise a few issues to think about in terms of making that how, why, and when happen. I do have homework to give everybody, but I'll leave that to after the discussion. Thank you for listening, everyone. And I'm really excited to really engage in some good questions